What we're getting into is not just, what's your favorite kink or what's it like being a this or doing that. We're kind of exploring, I think, maybe the philosophy of labels and identification, maybe the like health and some of the pitfalls and dangers of the labels that we use on ourselves. So we're going to be getting into it in a lot of different ways. But I guess I want to acknowledge at the beginning that even though we're going to be talking tonight about sort of the dangers of some of these labels or how over identification can cause a lot of harm in some different ways, we are talking about things that people have like protested to protect and fought and died in many cases in order to create. Some of the most powerful moments that I've had as a therapist have been in helping people like find these types of labels for themselves, or some of the most profound moments of my own life have been when people have used some of these types of adjectives on me. So I want to really start by just acknowledging the importance of them and see if y'all had any like big moments in your life where these types of labels really showed up or meant something really significant to you. Nate, let me start with you if I can.
Sure. I've got actually two. I'll go through them fairly quickly. My ex-partner and I were both the first person that the other came out to as bisexual, and I remember that being an incredibly powerful experience because the acceptance and the Me Too, and then it was just like a weight lifted off my shoulders. The other one, when I was about 16, my mother found a Playgirl magazine in my room, and she took me out to dinner and she asked, Nate, are you gay? And it was just like, my face flushed red, and I'm like, no, 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 of course not, no. And so that's sort of the flip side of that. But over time, I came to sort of discover, my sexuality, and yeah, there's a couple for me.
Yeah, hey, I so appreciate you sharing those with us tonight. Laura, what comes to mind for you? Laura, I think we've got you on mute.
There we go. Yeah, I can think of 2 situations, in which they were kinda, like, more subtle, similar to Nate's, where it was really not a big, huge coming out or whatever, but the first one was, opening up to my husband about my sexuality, and then us increasing our conversation about sexuality and sex in general and just how it changed our connectedness and our understanding of each other. That was really, really powerful and amazing. And the other one was just kind of sort of subtly coming out to one of my best friends. And within the conversation, he said just like us or we instead of me specifically. And so I was able to ask him like, "Hey, are you bisexual? Like what it?" And it turned out that this person was going through some pretty big transitions, not just in terms of their sexuality, but also their gender. And I ended up being one of the first people that they told. And then we ended up being able to connect on that more. And we became sort of like closer or more connected because of it. So, no big, huge public coming out stories, but both really, really sweet and both resulted in a deeper relationship.
Yeah, one of the things I think we're going to really tease out tonight is how these labels can perhaps create separation and isolate people, but they also definitely bring people together and help people find their community. So I think that's really beautiful to highlight. Thank you so much. Sin, tell us your story. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very, very blessed and lucky that, my family was always very sort of tolerant and stuff. So I guess it was hard for me to come out to my best friend when I sort of realized that I also liked girls. But at, 13, 14, I didn't really understand everything about my feelings. And but I do remember I built this up for like weeks before I could tell her. And she is, super hyper Christian person, but she is one of the good that being said, I drew this out that I had this secret to tell her, and it felt like such a burden. It felt like this heavy weight that was just crushing me. When I finally got the words out, she was like, I pretty much knew that's what it was. And that
Mm.
and she was just like, good for you. In that moment, I was like, oh, this doesn't have to be difficult and painful. And And so, that was probably like my first sense of being like validated, I guess, maybe at that age.
Hmm.
And then as I grew and I, graduated high school and started maturing as a person, it was like bisexuality was a label that didn't quite feel right to me. And I felt like I didn't identify in that way. And so when I discovered that I could use the term queer to kind of just more be like, this is who I am. That, like, it's almost a little vague, but uh all I know is that I am definitely not straight. And
Yeah.
so the term queer to me was just like a big fluffy sweater that I could wrap around myself, and it just fits so well and it's so cozy. And so that was good for me, to find that sort of term. And now we have so many little subgenres we can put ourselves in, that it gets very confusing. And I feel like sometimes, especially with younger people, it's like, hey, you can just say queer and it'll be
Right.
right.
Yeah, it's such a powerful word in that way. And I feel like so many people do go through that journey where they sort of vaguely acknowledge that maybe there's something about them that's a little bit queer. And then they go into this gold rush of, well, this label is mine and this label is mine.
Yes.
And that's totally valid too. But there
Mhm.
is a certain point, I think, for a lot of us where we no longer want to walk into every bar announcing like 27 different descriptors, and we're just like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, we're queer.
Yeah. I feel like it really simplifies things.
Yeah, well, Sin, I'm going to stay with you because a lot of this episode was kind of your idea. You know, you
Mhm.
and I were talking, and I actually heard from somebody else recently. Somebody told me recently that any valid definition of the word togetherness necessarily includes the idea of being like set apart. You know, that we can't have an us unless we have a them. And I wanted to hear more from you about how these terms can be isolating.
Yeah, sometimes, I think there's just, again, there's so many terms now. And what I find with a lot of, sometimes it feels like a lot of young people in these online spaces, and they don't know exactly what they are, but they've heard, about this and about this. And so they're sitting there having like a crisis of identity, being like, I don't know which one I am, and I'm so stressed out about it. And I feel like, that can maybe cause some problems too, being like,
Sure. That
that can
pressure
be
to have it all figured out.
yeah, yeah, like that can be isolating too, because it seems like they're really struggling. And though I do feel that, when you do find a label, then you can be like, oh, this is the code I can put on and it fits me. And then now I can go and be with those people. But at the same time, like, if you're just queer, like, you can be queer with all the other queer people. And I don't know, that's, I really love, LGBTQ. Like, that to me is a great label, because it's like we're just in this pool together. And that doesn't mean necessarily that, we're pushing other people away, like you can't be a part of this. But um it's just weird, because I see both sides. Like, I do see how it can be so validating to find that thing that feels like it fits you. But it can also be separating too, because a lot of, mainstream society is still grappling with just coming to terms with, using the right gender pronouns and things like this. And they find it scary, and so then they're like pushing themselves away. And it's, I feel like there could be ways to bring us all more together and more understanding.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate why we want to subdivide and find the people like us, but so often we struggle to form communities only to then like use them as exclusionary devices, and we get
Yeah.
further and further from just
Mhm.
being a human.
Yeah.
Laura, what's your experience been?
Yeah, so, my experience or my opinion on using labels?
Yeah, no, what can you tell us?
Both.
Yeah, so I think that labels can have really powerful good use, and certainly there's been times where my experience with labels has been really, really positive, like the 2 stories that I told, but they can also be kinda tricky. And so when Sin was talking and we were talking about, like, well, labels can be used to sort of other people, and that was in chat. Someone had said labels can be used to other people. They can, but it really depends. Is the label describing you, or is the label meant to set you apart as being different, or like an in-group versus out-group type of thing, right? So just labeling myself as mom, for example, that just describes part of my reality. And so I would
Mm,
say that labels around sexuality and gender are very, very similar to that kind of label, where they're describing a part of your reality, a part of who you are, but they're not necessarily meant to segregate or create these really like hard-lined in-group, out-group dynamics. I think that dynamic comes from outside of, in my opinion, it comes from outside of the queer community who wants to like isolate people and say that you're not okay for being who you are. That creates this sense of need for a community and need for a us versus them. But you take away any sort of like that really negative backlash, and it just becomes part of who you are. Like me saying I'm a woman and me saying I'm queer become relatively synonymous. Like neither one is exclusionary or creating that dynamic. So I really think the use of labels, it can be really positive until you start to get this in-group, out-group um, sort of dynamic. And I don't think that that's entirely necessary, especially when we're talking about labels around sexuality and gender. I think that it's evolving slowly to where that's not going to be the case eventually. And I kind of hope that that's the case.
Yes.
yeah, I really appreciate that distinction that like a lot of these labels can be more like adjectives than
Mhm.
categories. You know, we can say like this ice cream is chocolatey without having to like define it as chocolate ice cream or whatever that might look
Or to
like.
say that that means that vanilla ice cream or strawberry ice cream are somehow different or less than or need to be excluded.
Sure, yeah, or aren't invited to our party. Nate, anything you want to add here?
Sure, yeah. I think it's useful to have these subdivisions, just to dovetail into what Laura was saying, as long as it doesn't descend into gatekeeping others from joining you in that. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of what we're all kind of dancing around. And I think that's maybe what the person that mentioned to you that we can't have an us without a them. I think maybe they've got a bit of that gatekeeping instinct,
Sure.
perhaps residually, and it can be tough to lose that, especially when it is a journey and it's a tough journey and it's a battle sometimes to get
Mhm.
there. But once you get in, it doesn't mean you slam the door, folks. Don't be a gatekeeper.
Well,
Sure.
and do you sometimes think that some of that gatekeeping might be a bit of defensiveness
Yeah,
also?
that's what I'm saying. Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Which, in marginalized communities, which is generally what we're discussing here,
Right.
that's going to be kind of natural. We can
Mhm.
talk about the usefulness of that defensiveness, but I think we also need to recognize that it's valid and have compassion for the folks who, have really, really struggled under some of these adjectives or struggled to have these adjectives while also maybe having them thrown back in their face. I mean, let's remember that we're all sitting here espousing like the value of the word queer. Well, when I was a kid, queer was the person on the schoolyard that was getting beaten up, that was having rocks
Yeah.
thrown at them.
Yeah, that's a really, I mean, it's just like a lot of other words that have been used in hateful ways
Hmm.
when culture kind of shifts and then we take that word and we use it in a way that's meaningful to us, and I know that there is, an older generation of queer people who do like bristle at that word because it's been used in a hateful way in the past. But
Sure.
um and I think we should be mindful of that, but at the same time, we're moving forward, and this is a great word that makes it easy for someone to just understand that I'm in that group.
I love taking the power away from it in that
Yeah.
sense.
Hmm.
And I,
Reclaiming it. Yeah.
I want to be mindful here not to go down too deep of a philosophical rabbit hole. We tend to leave some of the navel gazing to Talk Heathen and these other shows on the Atheist Experience Network. But as far as I can understand it, the research to me seems to show pretty plainly that this old-fashioned idea of like not just the soul, but like the one true self, that still little quiet voice inside of us that encapsulates our true essence, that doesn't seem to exist. As we better understand our neurobiology, we seem to be more like a flock of seagulls sort of vaguely traveling in the same direction than we are like one true purpose. So if that's true, how accurate do you think these labels can even be? I mean, can somebody even describe themselves as gay or as a sub or some of these things if we're not really individuals in that sense? Nate, let me start with you, if I may.
Sure. I think rather than a flock of seagulls, I would be a flock of Canadian geese. So
Naturally, right.
naturally, the killer animal of the
Carrying
flock.
hockey sticks and drinking syrup as they travel.
Absolutely. I think that is a really useful metaphor, especially when you're young, because I don't think that your sexuality or your labels are something that you really decide. It's more something that you're gonna discover as you go through. So I feel like at this point in my life, I might be, maybe one or two murderous Canadian geese. But absolutely, I think that could be a great metaphor, especially for young folks trying to figure out where they're going. And this stuff is also not only are we not one voice, but even if we were one voice in our heads, that can change over time,
Yes.
right? It's not a static thing. So either way you look at it, nothing is permanent, nothing's forever.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Laura, Sin, anything y'all want to add to that?
Oh, well, I just feel very strongly like that. That's exactly how I feel, and I know that when we're young, it's I mean, just being a person who's now 38, and like I remember when I was 20 and I'm 13, and who I thought I was, who I thought my label was, throughout those periods has opened and grown and shifted so many times, and just keeping in mind that like that you can be easy with yourself. You can leave space for that, even, as a young person. Like, this isn't a deadline homework assignment. You must figure this out now. Give me your label now.
I
And
think that's
don't
such a
ever
great
change
point.
it.
I just wanted to highlight that as much as I can because we get so many phone calls to this show that are like, I need this label now. And it's like,
Yeah.
you maybe
Or even
don't. I
worse, like,
mean,
I
I
need to
appreciate
figure
it.
out who I am right now, and that could take time.
Yes, and that's probably more where it's coming from, but it's just that
Mhm.
it does take time, and that even when you think you've got it and you got it nailed down, and then something happens and you're like, whoa, maybe that wasn't what I thought, that's not who I am, and you just never know, what life's gonna give you.
Yeah, yeah. I would add that labels can be very useful if you're the one that's giving yourself the label and if you're the one that's choosing when and how to use it. Like if you
Mm,
feel strongly of
Mhm.
identifying as
Yeah.
gay or straight or bi or gender queer or whatever, like if you're comfortable with that, use it. But it becomes really unuseful when other people are applying it to you or when because of your use of it, you start to get sort of, people start to think of you as being less dynamic than you really are. I know there's a
mm.
big argument between like bi versus pan, and are bi people more or less inclusive with which genders they're attracted to? And
Mhm.
it shouldn't have to be that big of an argument, but because we tend to pigeonhole the label as having a specific definition, then you can start to almost mislabel yourself. Like, well, that's not really what I meant when I said that this is my sexuality or this is who I am, right? It's more fluid than that, or it's not quite this or quite that. So
Oh yeah.
I do think that there's a space to I love what Sin said, where it's like, don't rush to label yourself, but if
Mhm.
you do, like, to understand some of the, misunderstandings that other people could apply or whatever their understanding of that specific label is, that's the
Oh
reaction
yeah.
that you're gonna get, even if you don't feel like that's you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, let me ask you to keep going with that because, as y'all pointed out, a lot of these labels will change over time. Some of them sort of evolve and transform, others change completely. So, Laura, have you felt pigeonholed by some outdated or maybe like an ill-fitting label?
Yeah, definitely when I called myself just straight, I would explain to people, "But I'm still attracted to women, but I'm straight," right? Because I'd never been in a relationship with a woman, like, "Oh, yeah, I think that Mila Jovovich is, like, hot as can be, but, I'm not in a relationship with her, therefore I'm straight." Um, that
Mhm.
tended to pigeonhole me a little bit. It was a lot more flexible once I was able to say, like, "Well, I'm bi or bi-curious," I think was one that I used a long, long time ago because, well, I haven't been with a woman, therefore I can't own the card.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, there's definitely it's interesting. The more I started to use labels and learn about labels, the more I was able to pick the ones that applied to me at the time and the less pigeonholed I felt.
And that's
It was
interesting.
more Go
Sorry to
ahead.
cut you. Well, I was just gonna say that's interesting because it's like you said I must be straight even though I'm clearly physically attracted to women, but only because I haven't been with a woman yet. So it's like
Right.
your limitations on what that word meant only through your own lens, whereas like
Mhm.
other people, I view it totally differently. Like I don't think you have to have, been like had sex with a woman or been with a woman in order to know that you're bisexual or pan or whatever you might be.
You don't have to
Right.
earn it in
And
a certain sense. Like you
yeah.
get to just
Yeah.
describe yourself because again, it's an adjective that
Mhm.
you use to describe yourself, not a category that you belong to because you've like earned it and achieved it.
Right,
Is
There's
right.
that
no
fair to
badges or
say?
membership cards. Yeah, yeah. But I would say like and I think the younger generations today aren't gonna struggle with that the way that our generation struggled with it when we were younger. Because there was a lot of mystery around sexuality where it's like, if you're straight, fine, perfect, great, we got it. We had sex ed, we've got it all
Name
figured
of
out.
that
But if you're anything other than straight, then it's all confusing. And it was very binary at the time, right? Where you're either gay or straight, and then okay, there's also this bi thing, but everyone kind of lumps that back in with gay. And so there's a lot of confusion. I think today there's so much more flexibility, and kids are being taught so many more different ways of looking at sexuality that we had to kind of figure out on our own, like in our 20s, early 30s. Like I only discovered what words like pan meant, God, like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I so appreciate what you're saying here because I don't think I even realized how much damage it did to me to feel like gay and straight were the only two options
Right.
because me and everybody in my life knew that I was not straight, but gay didn't feel appropriate. I mean, I was a hopeless romantic as a kid. In like third and fourth grade, I was obsessed with girls, and that never really went away, even as I hit puberty. So to have people calling me queer and knowing that that meant gay specifically was really confusing for a number of years, and I think kind of stuck me in a like a default box of straight, even though that definitely didn't fit anybody. uh, Sin, I have to imagine that through your work you get sort of shoved into very specific labels or categories perhaps more than most of us. I mean, has that been your experience?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like lots of comments on my Instagram. I might have posted something about my husband, and all these people will be like, "Oh, but you're a lesbian, though. But you're a lesbian. Wait." They're like their heads explode, and I'm like, just because that's all you've ever seen of me does not mean that's like everything of who I am. And I tell them, I've never said that I was a lesbian. Like I've never claimed that because um because my attractions and the reasons that the ways I'm attracted to different genders are they're different. They're just and so it's not so easy for me to just say I'm bisexual or just say I'm pansexual because like I tend to have more romantic feelings like when it comes to men, but I tend to have more sexual feelings when it comes to women, but like those things can shift and overlap. And I felt like, I just don't want to write an essay every time someone's like, so what's your sexuality and gender? And I'm just like, I'm queer. But the perception from fans who maybe only look at my scenes that I've done, like my mainstream scenes, and then they see me doing it in such this passionate, legitimate way, that they can't even fathom that I would also enjoy sex with men in the right circumstances. So
Mm.
like I just wish and hope for a future where we can all just be a little more flexible, with like our open-mindedness and our understandings of each other as people.
Yeah, well, I love that philosophy, but I want to also kind of highlight something that you said about, being labeling yourself as bi or labeling yourself as pan, but not having like an even ratio. You know,
Oh yeah.
people often think that being bisexual means that you have to be like equally attracted to both men and women.
Yes.
And we don't really have good research on any of that, but big data from like dating websites and different things are showing us pretty clearly that most people that are bi or pan or that date more than one gender do have like a fairly large shift. They primarily will date men and sometimes date women or vice versa, and these kinds of things. Not that it isn't valid to have, 50-50, but
Yeah.
it's also okay. Like you're allowed to use some of these adjectives, even if they aren't, even if you're not like squarely in the middle of some of these spectrums.
Yeah, and
Well,
I
that's
like
so
what led me away from the term bisexual.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it had that implication,
That
and that
two
just,
category 50-50 thing.
yeah, and that just didn't feel right for me.
Yeah. Nate,
yeah,
what
and
would you like to add here?
I just really like what Sin said about what was it that she said? That it's not, you don't want to have to write an essay every time somebody asks you what your sexuality is. So like for me, oftentimes because I work in trades, and if it comes up, I'll just say gay, because I don't want to sit there having to explain what all these, bi, pan, this, that, and the other thing. I don't want to have to give them a lesson in sex ed at work every day. So often I'll just say gay, even though, I've flirted with the pan label, and probably bisexual is closer. But another thing that Sin said that kind of resonated for me was that it's not the 50-50 thing. And for me, I primarily dated women until I came out to the first partner that I came out with. And then after that, it was like the floodgates were broken and I felt sort of liberated to kind of be myself. And then after that, I sort of shifted more towards dating men. And I really honestly have never went back. It's been incredibly liberating. I don't know what you'd call that, but I don't care.
And that's good.
Well, and that brings up a good point. Like we talk about sexuality as a spectrum, and I think we think of it somewhat as like the rainbow at the bottom of the screen, where there's these really distinct lines and colors. But
Mm.
really, like a color spectrum is very blurred, and the colors move from one end to the other. And we don't have a label for every single type of attraction that every single person has. And I almost cringe to think of how we're trying to pigeonhole so many different labels to describe just who I am or just who you are, that we're getting a little bit over the top with the types of labels that we have, because you honestly can't. Like the person who's,
Mm.
say, bisexual but more attracted to women than men, or more attracted to men than women, like there'd have to be a different label for every single little spot on that color spectrum. And it's I think it's really important to keep in mind that that is where labels in terms of sexuality serve us the least, is that we are all the different shades of all the different colors in terms of our sexuality, and it changes throughout our life. Like Nate was saying, like as soon as I had this specific experience, my attractions and my drives changed. And I can tell you that that's happened multiple times throughout my life, where who and how my attractions manifested have changed throughout my life. And when we start to have these really distinct labels, it leaves very little wiggle room.
Yeah, sometimes the most accurate label for ourselves is Larry, or Laura or Nate or Sin or these things, like, because there are almost 8 billion people on this planet, and each one of us is going to be somewhere different on nearly all of these spectrums. But each of you talked about sort of that letting go of maybe the label of bisexual or some of these other things. And I think one of the real dangers of over identification, of getting like too attached to your belonging in one of these categories,
Mhm.
is that you start to ignore who you actually are. You're no longer present with who you actually are and are instead just sort of ascribing to this veneer. And I was curious if any of y'all had any advice for how to sort of like Marie Kondo, like say thank you and goodbye to some of those old adjectives. Sin, would you like to get a start here?
Yeah, like I mean, when you're talking, it's just kind of like it feels that, the more you zip yourself into this tight latex suit of the label, that you've settled upon, then you might start like behaving in the ways to keep you in that suit and not let yourself breathe, or find yourself so confused when, you have an attraction that doesn't fit your label that you've, taken it on for yourself. And I think like a good example of that is I read Elvira's book, Cassandra Peterson, and highly recommend. But she spent her whole life thinking that she was one way, and this is who she is. So then, when she met her life partner, who she's been with for 20 years now, but it took her, a while. Like, she was feeling herself falling for this person, but she's not gay. So how can I be having feelings for this person? I can't allow it, and it took her a journey with herself to recognize like that she just loves this person. And so she's going to be with this person who happens to be a woman. I feel like if we can all have those experiences. It's like, if you just are open to whatever comes your way, like there's more opportunity for love and connection. Hopefully that made sense.
No, it's again about just kind of holding all of this really loosely, and I
Yeah.
think not getting overly attached to anything, which is definitely something that I talk about in a million different ways in the counseling office. That we can sort of hope in a general direction and sort of set our sights to go towards something, but we can get really into a lot of trouble when we start to get attached to a specific outcome and stop being present in the moment in that way.
Yeah.
Laura, what can you add to all this?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and we get so attached to our labels that, like you said, we can sometimes fail to understand who we really truly are. And like I had a friend recently who was kind of freaking out because she had decided to be with a man, and she's like, "But I don't get it. I'm a lesbian. Like this is so wrong." And she was legitimately freaking out about it. She was upset about it.
Mm,
And I had a conversation with her about how you can be flexible. You can be like 99.999% lesbian, and it's still okay if you're attracted to men too, or if you decide to have sex with a man. If it makes you happy and if it's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think
Exactly.
just having that gentle conversation of the label is there to describe you, it's not there to confine you, and it's not there to tell you who you are. It's there to help you describe yourself to other people. And being emotionally attached to that label can actually cause more anxiety and stress and I don't know, those freak out moments than it really actually needs to.
yeah, and I worry when I hear people talking about like having their gold star or of like losing status or membership to some particular group because they crossed a line. And there is such a, like, I understand the tribalism and the desire to like reinforce these communities, but it feels so important. I mean, especially as we are already looking at, pushback against Obergefell and looking at rises in white nationalism and in purity culture and a lot of very scary things in terms of our electorate. I definitely want to be willing to circle the wagons and have like some unity in these queer spaces.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know how when you buy something, sometimes the label comes off and it just peels off perfectly and there's no residue left over. And then sometimes like half the label peels off and there's all that white crap left, right?
Yes.
Well, some people feel compelled to scrape the entire thing off. Some
Mm,
people are okay to just leave a little bit of that on. And
Mhm.
that's okay. I think a lot of the times that just depends on you, whether you're okay with having a little bit of that left over or whether you want to peel the whole thing off. It's really up to you. Although for me, I like the ones that come off nice and easily.
that's
I
such
don't
a
know
Yeah,
great
about you.
metaphor. Thanks, buddy.
I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.